All right, guys, recording started, and I will stop at the end if you have any questions you don't want to be recorded on.
Oh,
Um,
Professor, I believe you didn't call my name.
Aita? Okay, let me just,
Etana, yeah.
Itana, sorry. Yes. I
Same as
just
with me. I
screenshotted,
just joined.
Sad,
It's Tim here.
got
Yes.
you.
Yes.
And then who said same here?
Christian.
Uh, Kristen, okay.
Telling you right
And
now,
me.
I'm
And me
not,
too, Professor.
we're
Oscar,
never,
okay.
we're never
Yeah.
coming back here again. This is, you got me outside.
And, okay. Christina, Valeria, and Camilla. Okay.
A whole compound here.
I've got everyone else. All right, I'm gonna mute Christy there. And no worries. And all right, we're good to go. Guys,
I'm so sorry.
no problem. Everyone that's here, I also screenshotted your attendance, so that's why I didn't finish the roll. Sorry for that. All right, let's get into chapter 4. So chapter 4 is going to be really important for your team project and your final exam, which will be a team assignment as well. So defining the project, we're in chapter 4, gone through our introduction, strategy, our chapter on organization, chapter 3. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention, so your chapter 3 quiz would have been, you would have taken that in class tonight, but since we have so many individuals that were remote and we're still having, access to Wi-Fi and AC issues, I wanted to go ahead and make it accessible to everyone. So the chapter 3 quiz has been posted. You have until tomorrow night, Wednesday night, the 28th, by 11:59 p.m. to submit it. Make sure that your answers are in a complete sentences. And yeah, it maybe takes you 30 to 45 minutes if you have to kind of reread and look through it. So, all right, objectives for chapter 4. So we'll be talking about what a project scope statement is and understanding the purpose of scope statements. We'll talk about what scope creep is and how to manage scope creep at a very high level. We'll understand the project priorities and how they're classified. We'll demonstrate the importance of a work breakdown structure, also show you examples of work breakdown structures, and we'll begin the kind of functional pre-planning to develop into a work breakdown structure for an actual project. So we'll also talk about the organization breakdown structure and how it applies to org units in larger companies. There's also a process breakdown structure that we can use in software instances and a responsibility matrix. Lastly, we'll close with a communication plan and an example for that. So here's our chapter outline. Steps 1, 2, and 3. I would say if you are going to read any part of the chapter, 4.1, 4.2, 4.3 are super critical and important for you to understand and be able to apply. So we have 5 general steps for connecting project information. So we need to define what needs to be done, right? We need to define the scope. And then once we know what needs to be done, we can prioritize based on the extraction of the requirements of the project scope. Once we outline everything that needs to be done to accomplish the scope, we can create a work breakdown structure, and we'll talk more about what that is, what it entails. Once we do that, we'll integrate it with the organization, we'll assign roles, and then lastly, we will code the work breakdown structure for information system purposes. All right, so as a rule of, oh yeah, Christy back in? All right. So, as a rule of thumb, we can only control what we've planned. And that is why it's necessary and important to define what the scope of the entire project is going to be at a high level. Now we can break this down and segment it over the life of the project, and we can further define what to do to accomplish the scope. But the scope is basically the definition of the end result of your project. So what do you want to achieve after the project is complete. What is your definition of done? This is achieved by using specific terms, having tangible criteria, and being able to measure it. So if the scope's poorly defined or the mission, is unclear, then that creates a barrier to the success of the project. The scope is what you expect to deliver for your customer when the project is complete. Okay. All right. So for our scope checklist, first we need the project objective. That is to define the objective to meet the customer's need. So in your homework one, that would have translated to your mission and vision statement, right? What do you envision the end result of your job search to be? What qualifications would it need to, suffice in order for you to say that it fulfills the mission and vision of your job post grad? So the project answers the questions of what, when, how much, and at times where. So we can kind of envision that the more specific we are, the more intentional we are with our search, the better our end results will be. Secondly, the scope description. So that is a detailed description of characteristics of the product, service, or the outcome of the product. So in your homework one, that would have translated to the 7 criteria. The description is not only what do you want, but how do you want the end result to look, in what capacity, um, you know, what type of end result is wanted, what achieves the objectives of the project. Thirdly, justification. Your justification is the business case, and that can resolve, in um, in defining the reasons why the criteria and the project objective are being delivered. So you could use it in terms of a return on investment. This project is justified because it will reduce costs by X number, or it will increase our efficiency. Whatever the reason or the cause for initiating that project, that will also help your stakeholders understand why other projects haven't been chosen. All right, next up would be to define the major deliverables. So these deliverables are the outputs that you will produce over the life of the project. So so we're breaking down, right? Like a tree. We're going from the top, most generalized portion and breaking it out into a description, justifying the means, and then creating the deliverables, which are the actionable items that will carry out your project. Deliverables can also be called requirements. For milestones, so your textbook definition of a milestone is a significant event in a project that occurs at a point in time. So there's the creation of milestones is going to be a logical point of significant completion within a period of work. So, for example, in your homework 2, when you are going on the camping trip, a major milestone might be completion of all the preparation activities, right? And so that means that you will have a list of activities, or deliverables that will be carried out prior to the larger milestone completion. And that should have a logical order of, time-based, how do I say it? Sorry. Let me add somebody in the room. So there would be a logical time-based progression of events that would occur, right? So I gave someone an example in email. So if you have a plan on how to go to work in the morning, then there are a certain set of steps that you would carry out before you would achieve the end result of arriving at work on time and prepared, right? So if you are getting dressed, if you are driving to work, there's a sequence of logical events that follow the progression of time that you can't take out of order, right? Or you can't separate the, completion of morning routine, right? You can't place that milestone in a separate order, in a separate area, and say, okay, these are my milestones and these are my tasks. And so the milestone or the tasks lead up to the milestone. Does that make sense? All right, and then the technical requirements. So these are your product specs. These are your technical specifications that you are going to use to ultimately determine what the purpose intended is of the result of your scope. Okay, next, limits and exclusions. So your limits and exclusions are going to specifically give a time-based dependency to, or specifically take out portions of the project. So if if you're contracting a project to a customer, then you may want to only operate within a certain time frame of hours. Maybe your employees only work 8 to 5. Or maybe there are portions that you have not calculated in your budget, like additional training, like handover activities. And so you want to exclude that so the customer doesn't come back and say, hey, this is part of the overall scope. This is part of our intended result. And you say, no, that's part of our limit or exclusion. And so that should be, duly noted at the time of contract signing. Lastly, acceptance criteria. That's a set of conditions that need to be met before the deliverables are accepted. So this may mean specific approvals by the customer. It may mean that a certain criteria checklist has to be signed off, or a certification needs to be imposed before the project can be said to be completed. All right. So in your project scope, you would have your scope statement would be a 1 to 2 page summary, and it would give the outline of everything that is intended for the project completion. So the scope statement is also called a statement of work, and in larger companies, this can be 30, 40 pages long, and it specifically outlines the elements in our scope checklist. So a project charter is the official authorization that the project can proceed. So it allows the project manager authority to execute on the project. And this would include a brief scope description, and it will also have the business case, any budget identification, and some team elements, right? Like key stakeholders. So you guys will complete a project charter after we select the project, and then that charter will be submitted prior to your final exam project, which will be a project management plan or an excerpt of the plan, because we could go, into oblivion with documents that support the project plan. But the project charter would include the scope statement. So scope creep. Scope creep is something that can happen gradually over time, and it is it can mean that there are certain specifications, or there could be a rearranging of the project schedule, or a customer can add in requirements that are not explicitly stated in the scope, which can allow the project to bloat or get larger or become longer or more expensive over time. So most of the reasons why scope creep occur would be actually one of the main reasons is poor requirements analysis. So understanding exactly what the customer needs and exactly, having a unified vision of what the end result will achieve. Sometimes this takes multiple conversations if you are scoping a project for an external customer, or the group may not know exactly what the end's supposed to look like because they're not familiar with the type of software or the type of construction that is happening. So it's really on the burden of the project manager to make sure the requirements analysis are succinct, that they are specific, and that they explicitly state what is and what is not included in the work set. So not involving users early enough. If we complete a project over and over, and they might be similar in nature, then we may take for granted that we know what all the steps that are involved in this specific project that we're working on. And so it may take liberties in the project schedule, in the budget, in the level of complexity, which is our next step, our next point, and not correctly scope the work involved. So next would be too many decision makers. I can say on an ERP implementation that I completed, everyone had a say and everyone had requirements and justifications for why, their specific argument needed to be added to the project scope. And so before the signing, they might be able to make a case, but after the signing, it's more about justifying why certain things will not be a focus of the project. So we don't want to overpromise or overdeliver. As project managers, you want to adhere explicitly to the scope. And if it's not in the scope, then it's not part of it and not something that can be added later without a formal change control. So saying yes to little things, saying yes to small changes that we don't think might affect much, or allowing those conversations to roll into, hey, we need to have a huge change. We need to add this to the project, extend it, and add this functionality. Well, we may or may not, right? So going through the level of escalation and confirming at the highest level of change control that that portion is required in this project. So a lot of times, if change control is not something that was approved for a specific edition, then we might say, okay, after this project is complete, we will keep this in mind for later iterations, right? Building it out or making it part of our ongoing operations to add this in. Lastly, gold plating is anything extra, right? Our extra value that we're adding to the project, extra features, extra functionality, little nitpicky changes that can get out of control really fast. So honing in on that early is very important to the success of the project. So what makes a project successful? We have three major criteria. So we have to stay within our budget parameters. We have to complete the project within the scheduled time frame. And it has to accomplish what we set out or intended to accomplish, right? It has to be our definition of done as according to the scope. So some things that project managers can do to you know, be able to be flexible within the project parameters is understanding, are we perfectly required to stay within cost or time or performance? What are the most critical aspects of completing this project? Are there constraints on the budget? What happens if we go over budget? What happens, um, you know, uh, do we have any flexibility in that area? Can we enhance any criteria? So if we're enhancing cost or time, that usually means that we're saving cost or time. So is that something that we should be looking out for? And then accepting. Is something tolerable not to be met in the original parameter? So is it tolerable that we take an extra, 6 weeks on a project as long as the scope is completed and the budget isn't significantly overrun, right? So understanding the company's needs, as far as that's concerned, is helpful. That's just your iron triangle, so your scope, schedule, and cost. And in it, we don't want to sacrifice quality. You will not use this matrix, but this just outlines, what parameters we can constrain, we can enhance, or we can accept within the development of, for example, this new wireless router. All right, so we have our scope. We understand our constraints. Now we want to build out the work breakdown structure, right? We have our deliverables. We know what major milestones we need to achieve. So the work breakdown structure gives the outline of the entire project at different levels of detail. So if we roll up the project, we have our major milestones. If we go a step further down, we have our deliverables. And then if we expand or blow up the project to the most granular level, we have our work packages. So the final deliverable is the relationship. Wow, that doesn't make sense. Okay, so I think I explained it better. Point three. So it serves as a framework for tracking cost and work performance. And I'll show you what the work breakdown structure looks like. But we have design and build projects with tangible outcomes. These are favored to the WBS. Process-oriented projects are going to use our agile iterative approach, and they're not going to be designed or executed on a level of granularity that the work breakdown structure would support. So here's our hierarchy of the work breakdown structure here. At the highest level, we have the project itself, right? Completion of the project would be the close and the completion of the work breakdown structure. From there, as I mentioned earlier, our project is broken down into deliverables. What are our major activities that need to be completed to roll up to the project completion, right? And their deliverables would include our milestones. So then we have sub-deliverables or supporting deliverables. So if we are going to complete a phone case, then having the screen component would be part of a sub-deliverable of the case, right? The next level down, we have a lower sub-deliverable. And this is our management responsibility level. So this would be, in a functional work environment, what team is responsible at the sub-deliverable level? What does the team have to complete as a unit in order to complete their portion of the total project? So the lower sub-deliverable and the cost account tend to be tied together, especially in a corporation or a large organization with several different functional areas. So the cost account is where you're going to be billing for labor, for resources within that function. And they'll have a unique cost account for their area of the project. So if you have a projectized organization, then the entire project would have, amount of funds allocated, and then you would break that out into the different functional sections to complete the work. And those would be your cost accounts. Lastly, the work package level. Again, that is the lowest level of work completion that you can document, that you can add. I'll actually expand on that in the next one. Okay, here, let me go to work package and then I'll go back. So your work package is the lowest level. So it has a definite start and definite stopping point. This is something that you can assign to a single person. Generally, you want it to be within about 10 work days. If it exceeds, if you're going into 2 weeks or more, then that may be an indicator that you want to break down the tasks further. So this is one independent, isolated bite or work task that you can complete as a standalone. All right, any questions to this point, guys? All right, cool.
No.
Okay, thank you, Sad. All right, so how does the work breakdown structure help the project manager? You might have the high-level deliverables, everyone knows what they need to do, they can just go and do it. Well, the larger the project gets, more the more independent work areas that are happening at the same time, right? So tracking completion of even the smallest work packages is very important because it can significantly delay the project at a higher level. So understanding the interdependencies of the work that is being done, who owns the work, and confirming its completion and tracking its progress along the way are all necessary components for the project manager to own. So they need to be able to report to different levels of management. So at the organizational level, at the executive level, at the individual contributor level, and make sure that everyone knows what work is being done and what work they need to be working on at any point in time. So the work breakdown structure also includes budget and costs by line item. And that also helps track the actual cost of the project at all points during its completion. So you want to make sure that your project is on time, that the costs are aligned with the percent completion of the project, and that you are moving through the project at a continuous pace. So either of those things does not fall behind schedule. Okay, here's an abstract example of a work breakdown structure. So here we're creating a tablet. We have the hardware component, the CPU component, and so on. So here within the hardware component, the hardware consists of frames, cameras, speakers, and antennas. So these are our major deliverables. We're only going down into one subsection. So whatever the lowest section is, that is our work package level. I know that earlier we showed, several different levels, and that may or may not coincide with your specific project. But here at the third level, we have, work package 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And once all of those work packages are completed, then we are completing the deliverable of having the camera ready. Okay, so each work package, again, needs to define what work is being done. It needs to give a duration of time to complete. So it needs to have a start date and an end date. It needs to have a budget assigned to it. It identifies who is doing the work and, what resources are needed. And it also monitors the points for measuring progress. Okay, the organizational breakdown structure, again, a real easy way to do this is by using cost centers. You can also, communicate to the management within their specific functional areas based on the owners of each of the work packages in the project. So rolling up their groups to say, okay, this is, Oscar is in the subcomponent of engineering, right? And the director of engineering is responsible for all of the engineering components, and they may have a unique cost account assigned to bill for resources in their area, which means that if it's designated by cost account that if they're taking longer than needed to complete the work packages, then it's costing the department more. And then that is an internal check and balance that you can use with upper level management to say, hey, we need to get on schedule. Okay, integrating the organizational breakdown into the work breakdown structure, you can see at the lowest level we have our org department. We have design, test, production, and outsourcing. And then we have our sub-deliverables to complete each of the phases of the tablet. So within it, we have cost accounts, and these cost accounts are being charged to the individual departments who are working on the work packages within the sub-deliverable. Okay. So coding the WBS for information systems. So the coding system within the WBS defines what level you are working on and what sub-deliverable or whether we're at the work package level. So it gives a roll-up of all of the organization elements within the project. It can also give you budget and cost information at a roll-up or a summary level. So what does that mean? Okay, here is an example of a coding system within the work breakdown structure. And the cool thing is when you guys start working in Smartsheet is that the coding system is largely written out for you, and it will automatically update when you move different deliverables within your work breakdown structure. So if I was to switch frame and cameras here, then cameras would become 1.1.1, frame would become 1.1.2. So there's no science to the work breakdown structure except that it is progressive on a numeric structure, and that whatever level we're moving down, we're going to add a subcomponent. So at level 1, we have the tablet. This is the entire project. Level 2, we have the subcomponent of hardware. Level 3 is is a further breakdown of the subcomponent. And whatever our lowest level in this in the WBS, that is our work package level. So here we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 levels in this project. I also wanted to show you, because I feel like the textbook example is highly abstract. This is another example of a WBS numeration system. And so you have the component, it looks like we're, completing a living room floor. And here we have finishes, right? We have flooring, we have the kitchen, we have living room painting. So all these different, redesigns are happening within this house. So under the component of finishing, we have, not only the living room flooring, we also have the kitchen, and then we also have a painting component. And then when we break that down more, we can see that we can assign these individual work packages laying the subfloor to a contractor or to an employee to complete. And then we have different levels of percent task completion. So multiple items are being worked on at the same time. You can see the task owner, there's a start date and an end date. And these are unique and these are dependent upon other tasks that are happening within the project. We've also assigned a duration of time to each of these activities. So this is an estimate. It says it will take 2 days. It might take 3 days. It might take 1 day, right? But we've assigned a duration of time so we can keep track of the overall project progress and completion. And we know that if an area takes longer, then we may need to catch up later on in the project to stay on schedule. Or depending on the dependencies, we might have multiple areas working at the same time, and we can afford to spend an extra day on one subcomponent because it doesn't affect the overall duration of the project. So you would set the tasks in order. It has a general timeline progression throughout the project. However, since it's organized by deliverables and subdeliverables, it may not follow a perfect timeline progression. So you want to order the tasks from the time that they begin through their completion time, and you'll generally have like a ladder or a stair-step progression throughout the project. And then, of course, you'll estimate the duration for the tasks. So, going back. All right, with our process breakdown structure, it is just like it says, it's going to be for process-oriented projects. So that is going to be a waterfall method. So you're going to have a series of steps and phases, and you'll be building out the granularity within each phase as it affects the phase that's coming up after completion. So here's an example of that. So we have the major phases of the software development project. And then we know on a high level what is included in each subsection of those phases. So then we can break out the activities within that beneath it. And then we have our major outputs. So as we go through, when we complete the analysis section, we go into the design section. We don't have construct, test, or rollout built out at a high level, right? We are building out the design section in advance as we're completing analysis. And then once this gets completed, we'll start to have a more granular breakdown of the construct phase and so on. All right, so our responsibility matrix, this chart just designates who is responsible for what, how responsible they are, and who is ultimately the owner of completing certain types of deliverables. So we want to know what activities are involved and who is going to be, who is going to actually be the one to get the activity done, or who's going to be responsible for having that task completed. So I don't like this one. It has, ideally, you want to have one responsible person for each task, right? And then you'll have other members who may also be involved in the task, but then they have a limited or supporting function within that task. So here's a responsibility matrix. And this has, again, I don't like the numerals. I much prefer a RACI chart. But here you can designate who is responsible for each of the subcomponents within the deliverable. So for example, there's architectural design. In it, you have design, development, documentation, assembly, testing, purchasing, quality assurance, and manufacturing. So we know that there are going to be multiple functions that are responsible for the overall deliverable of architectural design. So ultimately, the design department is responsible. However, it cannot complete the deliverable without the support of development, testing, and then without consulting quality assurance and manufacturing. But just like in your team or in your groups, while one person is designated responsible, everyone still needs to participate in some capacity for each of the steps. All right, now I'm going to get more granular about the project communication plan later on as we start to build out your projects. So the project is not going to be, it's not going to be the camping trip, right? So we laid out the camping trip as a means to organize and disseminate information and to get the groups talking to each other to work together to complete a result. And so depending on the synergy within your groups and your ability to work together and not just split tasks and bring them back together at the end, will ultimately determine the effectiveness of the output of your homework, right? And it will directly translate to the grade. So if you're working together throughout the project, it is reasonable to assume that you'll have a higher output at the end of the project. So the communication plan is going to be one of the components of your final exam. It tells everyone, tells all the stakeholders and the project manager what communication is going out to whom and why. So it lets you know, how will you gather information? How will you send information out? Who gets what type of information? And when is it going to occur? So for this, I used my own communication plan. Obviously, I had to delete all of the stakeholders. So we had the process owner, the business owner, the workstream leads, and the subject matter experts. They're all part of this overall communication plan. And as you can see, there are several different work streams meeting and for multiple purposes, right? And so you want to know, what is the purpose of this communication type? Does it have a title? Is it a group that has a name? Is it a work stream? Is it a department? How often are they meeting? When are they meeting? And then, what artifacts or deliverables will be produced as a result of the meeting? And how will the meeting be outlined? Or what process, whether formal or informal, will take place? And then what this one there, they had a dashboard associated with it. But This is your overall basically guide or key to what information should be said to whom, when, and why. All right, so how do you develop a communication plan like the one I just showed you? So you need to be able to have a list of all of your stakeholders. You need to understand what each stakeholder is doing, what their purpose is in the project, and how much information they need to know and how frequently. So this might mean some may need status reports. They may be an escalation for issues. They may be part of your scope change control for scope. They may be part of the core team getting the work done and so on. So they need to know certain pieces of information. They need to have access, either limited or complete access to the project schedule. And they need to be able to have communication methods. So Smartsheet is also, I think it's wonderful because it's kind of intuitive, but you can also build your knowledge over the course of the semester and become a power user in Smartsheet very easily. But there are ways to automate updates, like if a stakeholder has a due date coming up for one of their work packages, it can automate alerts or emails. It can send your executives percent completion of the project, budget consumption, anything, any tasks that are delayed, and so on, with a single automated email. And you can also collapse or expand the work breakdown structure to show different levels of the project, to share with different levels of management. Lastly, responsibility and timing. So we need to know who needs what and when. The stakeholder communication chart is not something that I use, but it's something that you need to conceptualize in the abstract when building out a project. So who has a high locus of power? Who has a high interest in the project? Right? If both are high, then you need to manage that very closely within the organization. This might be your project sponsor, for example. This might be the director over a major portion of the functional work. If they have a high sense of power but low interest, which means they're not working in the project day to day, maybe they're an executive in the company, you want to give them enough information that they feel satisfied, that they know how the project is doing, but you're not going to give them a lot of granular information, right? You're not going to update them constantly or prompt them. If both are low, then they're part of your external stakeholder group. You want to provide information. Maybe you have a website which discusses the high level progress of how the project's going. Maybe it gives an overview of, at the high level, what the scope is intended to achieve for the organization. And then if they have a high interest but very little as far as control or influence within it, you just want to keep those people informed. This would be your weekly newsletter. This would be, just like the quarterly town hall meetings, or it might be an update from your CEO or executive to the entire organization. They just want to know what's going on, and that's pretty easy to accommodate. So here's a more generic project communication plan structure. Basically, what are we doing? Who is getting it? When are they getting it? How are they getting it? And who's giving that information to them? Lastly, for chapter 4, please remember to read the chapter if you haven't. We will regroup on chapter 4 in some capacity on Thursday. So when you're in class, please keep that in mind. Make sure that you understand and can give examples of the key terms or explain what they mean within, the scope of what we've talked about in chapter 4. Any questions? I'm going to go ahead and stop recording at this point.